Welcome to Building Belonging, a podcast of the New York City Bar Association. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar. Here's your host, Tanya Martinez-Galanucci.
Welcome back to Building Belonging. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that's been of great interest to us always, but especially lately, we've been talking about it quite a bit. And that is the pathway into the profession for immigrant lawyers. And it's one that's near and dear to my heart. My husband is an immigrant lawyer, but one that we are hearing more and more about. Today, we're going to be joined by Christina Chelliah, who I had the pleasure and privilege of meeting at our Power the Pipeline conference, and who told us so much about her experience and the experience of so many others. After having just a single conversation with Christina, we said, we need you on the podcast. And we are very lucky because she's here with us today. She's going to introduce herself and tell you all about the issue. But first, handing it over to the team.
Hi, I'm Angie Mary Ellen, and I am the Manager of Development and Communications with the team.
And I'm Mary Ellen LaRosa, the Senior Diversity Coordinator for ODEEB, and I'm excited to pass this over to our guest today. Christina, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast today. Tanya, thank you for that introduction. The feeling is mutual. I'm so glad that I attended the Power the Pipeline conference. My name is Christina Chelliah. I am originally from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where I was initially admitted as an attorney. I worked as a corporate lawyer with one of Malaysia's leading firms prior to moving to New York. I am currently barred in New York City, and I'm also admitted in the United Kingdom as well. And I just want to give props to all of you in your team, because I think the work that you are doing is very important. It's very timely. And before we delve into any particular answers to the questions that you guys have for me, I just want to say that everything that I say today and any views that I express are my personal views and opinions of my experience getting admitted and practicing in this country, and do not represent the views of any present or past employers.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I think this is going to be such an important episode to share with the world.
Absolutely. This is such an important conversation. And as with all important conversations here at ODEEB, we would like to start out by asking you, what does belonging mean to you?
There's a couple of ways to answer that question, but I think considering the topic at hand and what we are trying to accomplish with this conversation and this discussion, I would limit my answer to what does belonging mean to me in the context of the legal profession, and specifically the legal profession in the United States, or as it applies to me, the legal profession in the state of New York, because that's where I've been admitted. I've had a bit of a unique path to admission in the US for the benefit of those that may not really understand how it works. You have American trained lawyers, they have an undergrad degree, and then they sit for an LSAT, which qualifies them for law school, and then they go to law school, they graduate from law school, and then they sit for the bar, and then they're out. But that's not the case for lawyers who come from other countries. There's different requirements for us. In my country, Malaysia, we do not need an undergraduate degree in order to go to law school. So when we finish high school, it's equivalent to O levels, which is basically like completion of high school in the United Kingdom. And then we need to do something called a Form 6 or an A levels, which is advanced level. And that can be as short as 1 year. It can be as long as 2 years. It depends on how long you take to do it. And that basically is considered pre-tertiary education that enables you to go on to law school or medical school. So when I graduated from law school, I was 22 years old because that was my first degree. And I was like, okay, how does that happen? And I think a lot of people in this country don't really understand. I've been asked so many times, where's your first degree or where's your college degree? And I'm like, we don't need to have a college degree to go to law school. And for any other degrees that's not a professional degree, that's not medicine or engineering or law or accounting, you don't even need an A levels or a Form 6. You basically, like from high school, that is good enough for you to go into your first year of your degree. So sitting for the bar is 10 months. It's almost a year because you're studying Malaysian law, compressed like a Malaysian law degree. That's usually 3 years. So that's 1 year as opposed to the bar exam here, which is like 6-7 weeks. So that's another 1 year. And just as a heads up, the reason why I'm mentioning all this is because it's going to be relevant for certain things that I'm going to talk about in later questions as to the hurdles that I faced. All these timelines that I'm mentioning, there's reasons for it as to why I'm mentioning it. So you finish your law degree, then when you study for the bar and pass the bar, you're looking at the timeline of your resume. It's 1 year after that. And then once you pass the bar, you have to then do your pupillage or your chambering, where you basically train under a seasoned attorney of at least 7 years of practice. And this is basically following the barrister style of how it is in England. So we call it reading in chambers. So you're a pupil, and then you have a master who is an attorney of at least 7 years standing. So it's a master-pupil relationship, and it's for 9 months. And at the end of that, you get admitted to the bar. So it's basically like when you finish your law degree, you have 2 more years. You have 1 year of studying for the bar, and then you have 1 year of doing your pupillage before you get admitted. So there'll be a 2-year gap between your law degree and you actually becoming a lawyer. So that has also posed hurdles for me here in New York, because especially bigger law firms, when they look at your resume, they go back to year of graduation and they look at the graduation of your law degree. But then that time lapse looked at as you didn't work or how many attempts that you had at the bar. I feel that the qualification process of foreign attorneys and their credentials, there's this divide or this gap between how you get qualified to sit for the bar in New York and then what happens after you pass the bar and how you're perceived. And it's just that lack of understanding in terms of what those foreign credentials mean. Coming back to belonging, it all ties in because when you are assessed in the same manner as how American trained lawyers are assessed, certain things don't apply to you because those timelines don't apply to you. Like you don't graduate with your law degree in May, sit for the bar exam in July, right? And then start practicing in September. Just using the Malaysian example that I gave you earlier, it's a 2-year process for us, whereas for here, it's a 4-month process. You're in practice. Whereas in Malaysia, it will take you 2 years, even if you pass everything the first time. So I think it's just the lack of understanding with the different processes and why dates will look different on a resume of someone that did not come out of the JD system. And I think inadvertently, we have been left out of that process of inclusion or consideration for positions because of that first pass of that resume, just based on dates that do not make sense to the average recruiter or average hiring partner who doesn't understand anyone that does not have a JD as their law degree.
That's such a good way to start the conversation and frame everything, because I think you're right. How can we have a conversation about you belonging in this industry when even with this little bit that you've described, it's clear this industry hasn't been set up to receive these amazing lawyers from foreign entities. And you're saying, you gave the example of Malaysia, but I don't have the stats on this. Shame on me, I should have done the research. The vast majority of countries outside of the US have a similar system to Malaysia when it comes to the legal profession.
Yes.
US is very much an outlier in that we have an undergrad and then the legal experience that we're so strict about requiring law school in most states. When if you even look at the history of becoming a credentialed lawyer in the US, that changed over time to be more exclusive, completely on purpose, right? Because the US used to have in many states an opportunity to become a lawyer through apprenticeship, not going to law school, being an apprentice, taking the bar. And most places, I think all actually have gotten rid of that option. So great way to get us started.
So taking a step back to look at the bigger picture, in a broader sense, what does DEI mean to you, especially within the legal profession?
A lot of people who are outside the profession and in general actually don't know what that means. And I actually have to explain it to them, and it takes a while for them to grasp it. I know that there are definitions out there as to what is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think on the whole, diversity is just making sure that not one group of people who look the same, talk the same, come from the same social class, have opportunities that others don't, have more of an access to the profession. And then equity is just, again, fairness. Like when you think about your first year of your law degree, like when you learn about the concept of equity, you think of all these Latin maxims that comes to your head. So equity is just fairness, and different people have different concepts about what fairness means. We just need to understand that the concept of equity or the concept of fairness actually differs from individual to individual. It's not the same. You can't just have a standardized system of, okay, we're going to implement this and this, and then we've done our part. And then inclusion, why is there a concept of inclusion in the first place, right? That implies that there's exclusion to begin with. Because it's like, why would we be talking about inclusion if no exclusion has already happened? And it's important to say that this exclusion, in my opinion, has just been very inadvertent. It's not malicious. I don't think anyone intentionally says, oh, you can never become a lawyer, or we don't want these types of people to become lawyers or to belong in the profession. I think it's, Tanya, as you said, it's just the system not being set up to provide means and ways and avenues for people who are not, I guess, the traditional type of lawyers to get into the profession, and hence the need for DEI. You can write as many white papers and whatever you want to do. And I just think it's just like one step at a time, because you're going to constantly hear stories, for example, like my story, which is a very unique story of my path, and then realize, oh, wow, there's another gap here as to access into the profession. How someone has felt like they've been excluded, but not intentionally, more so because the people who are decision makers don't even understand how someone like me could actually exist and then come into the profession in a way that's not considered the normal way that foreign attorneys come into the profession. So then when they find themselves in a situation like that, the default is, okay, but this is what our systems are, and these are our checklists, and this is what we need to do, and it's above my pay grade, and I can't do anything about this, and nothing gets done. Hence the need for this kind of conversation so that we can be open. I would say, like when I say we, I refer to the legal profession. And I think that it's everybody's responsibility. So even if you are not a recruiter, even if you're not a hiring partner, as you move up the profession, especially once you become a partner or you become like AGC or general counsel, people always come to you and ask you for your opinions on things and your advice. And when you meet someone like me, for example, at a bar event, who explains to you, hey, this is what I've been dealing with, your opinion actually counts more than you think, because you can walk in to the director of HR and say, can I please review, how are we bringing associates in? What are we doing? What's our checklist? Are we making considerations for people who look like they don't have a college degree, but that's because their country doesn't require it to go to law school? What are we looking at, and what's our process? And if they're using ATS, like an applicant tracking system, and things like iSIMS, if my resume is going through some sort of an ATS or some sort of a tracker, it looks like I'm lacking education. They're bypassing everything else. Okay, admitted in Malaysia, admitted in New York. They're probably just bypassing that because like, oh, where's your college education? And this actually happened to me. A recruiter was putting me forward for a mid-level M&A position. And this person was quite high up in HR. And she comes back asking the recruiter, I don't see all of her information about her education. Where is her undergraduate degree? And then the recruiter comes back to me and says, this is what, and she copy pastes like the excerpt from the email from the firm. And she says, can you explain? And I actually just explained the whole thing. I said, from point A to point B to point C, which leads me to where I'm at today and how I was admitted. And then after she gave that explanation, she just never heard back. To give her the benefit of the doubt, I honestly don't think it was malicious. I think if they weren't interested in me in the first place, that whole conversation wouldn't have happened. But I think it's more like just assuming, but they're sitting with this checklist of boxes and they're like, okay, where's this, what college, what year, right? And they're looking at all of that and they're not understanding how different it would be, how different it is for someone who didn't come out of that American system. So that's what I meant earlier by inadvertent exclusion, because then inadvertently I was excluded. And hence, my understanding of the word inclusion within the legal profession, because that has happened to me more times than I would like to count. And it's a short answer as to why I didn't get back into the practice of M&A, which is what I was doing in Malaysia for many years.
No, that's really helpful. And you're explaining it contextually, because I think a lot of times when we get into what DEI is, what it isn't, what people know about it. And by the way, I 100% agree with what you described to be the situation with mainstream Americans. If you ask just like a random person on the street what DEI is, brace yourself. Brace yourself, because it's a crapshoot, y'all. I have heard some really crazy things out there, and you don't even have to take my word for it. Turn on the TV. You have lots of people with much bigger platforms than mine just putting out a lot of misinformation and harmful stuff about DEI. Quote unquote, DEI must die. This is the world we're living in right now. But I think you're right. And I feel like you're a lot more generous with your explanation of why folks might or might not engage in these kinds of behaviors. But the truth of the matter is, you said it yourself, this has happened to me more times than I'd like to count. From this seat, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this story in different places on the trajectory. You're talking about having already been a practicing attorney with your own book of business and whatever, and then coming to the US and not being able to practice. I've heard that story. I've heard from all the law school students who are getting LLMs. Now, when the end of their time in the US is coming to a close, the shock and horror they experience when they realize they have very little chance, if any, getting a job in the US when they've spent all this money on tuition to get an LLM, to do all these things. We were just on the phone with a young lady just the other day, and it broke my heart. The way that she was explaining to us, she was like, when I went to these recruiting events, you should see the graphs they show of all the LLMs who got jobs. What they didn't tell us, and what we found out later, is that those were non-paying jobs. Those are the jobs that the LLMs were able to get. So your point about the fact that inclusion is in the term should tell you a lot, right? What is the unspoken stuff? If we need inclusion, it means that there was exclusion. So I think that this is really helpful. I have the next question. I think it's a good segue. You kind of started leaning into it. Can you tell us, as a foreign trained attorney, what obstacles you encountered, like from the beginning of your practice in the US to now? What are the things that surprised you? What are the big roadblocks that these folks, these recruiters, these hiring partners don't even understand exist? Frankly, they are the obstacles in many ways too. So we would love to hear about your trajectory.
Yeah, of course. The first thing to understand is that if you don't have a JD, if you don't have an American law degree, and you have a foreign law degree, first things first, you can only sit for the bar in 2 states in the US, either New York or California. So that's the first hurdle, right? Let's put that out there. Now, the second hurdle is most foreign lawyers would need to sit for an LLM, which is a US Master's in Law, in order to be eligible to sit for the New York bar or the California bar. So now that's the second hurdle. My story is a little bit different. I did not come to the US because I wanted to just do an LLM. I didn't come here as a student. So in the immigration sense, I've been actually fortunate because I came here on a diversity visa, the green card lottery. I got it, my passport was stamped, and I had to be in the States within 10 weeks. If not, I would have lost it. And I just got to the US and I figured I'll figure things out when I got here. After about a year or so, when I was wanting to figure out how I would get credentialed in the US, I spoke to a couple of different people, one of whom's a practicing lawyer in North Carolina. And he told me, because of your common law background and your British law degree, there is a possibility that you may get exempted from having to do an LLM. So why don't you look into that? So obviously I did all the research in the world, starting off with the Board of Law Examiners in New York, which is the credentialing and qualifying body for the New York State Bar exam. And when I looked them up, there's a whole section on the Board of Law Examiners website, which is, I think, bole.org. And it's literally called Foreign Legal Education. And they go on to explain what you need in order to be eligible for the bar. Depending on the nature of your legal education, you could have a quote-unquote defect in your legal education. And if you have a defect in your legal education, you need to cure the defect in your legal education in order to be eligible to sit for the bar. Now, the way you cure the defect in your legal education is by sitting for an LLM. And then they go on to talk about you can submit your previous legal education for evaluation, and there's a possibility of you being exempted from having to do an LLM, which would basically equate to there not being a defect in your legal education. But then it's also a gamble because they take a long time to get back to you. There's very few people that would submit credentials to be evaluated. So I was going on Reddit forums and I didn't have any peers in this country. I didn't have anyone from my country or anyone that was a lawyer. I didn't know anyone who was in the profession. So I had to just rely on what I could find on Google and on Reddit forums. And they were like, it could take up to 2 years. 14 months is considered quick. That was in my case. But the good news for me was that I was exempted from having to do an LLM. Obviously, at that time, I'm like, this is the best use ever, right? I don't have to go to Columbia or NYU or Georgetown and spend $200,000, which I don't have, by the way. And I was like, this is the best case scenario. I'm still grateful for it. But what I couldn't foresee was basically the disconnect between what happens after you study and pass the bar and get admitted to then, okay, where do you go from there? How do you then get gainfully employed? How does that happen? What is the bridge between that and getting employed the proper way? So I had to study for the bar myself. But after I was admitted, I'm not embarrassed to say this, considering the nature of the conversation. I'll be vulnerable. Why not? I was so naive, thinking getting a job in the legal profession was going to be similar to how it was for me in Malaysia. And I didn't even have to apply for a job in Malaysia. The offers came to me. I had to decide where I was going to go. And I'd never had to apply for a job in my life. And I was one of the biggest firms in my country. So obviously I didn't expect the same thing. No one who knows who I am here, and I didn't even study in this country. But I was like, okay, I'm just going to apply for stuff and I'm going to see what happens, And then from the very beginning of that whole process, that's when I started hearing all these things like, do you have US M&A experience? You have your law degree from so many years ago. And then when I start explaining, we only get admitted 2 years after doing our law degree. Oh, why is that? They're not, if you don't know it, it's okay. You're not supposed to know how other countries operate. But you need to be open to understand why there's that time, because the process is different for getting admitted. And then when I explained, said, no, I don't have US M&A experience, but I worked on cross-border transactions. The Petron deal, for example, the acquisition of Esso in Malaysia and Brunei, my firm worked on it. I was on that team. We worked with a lot of foreign clients, American and British clients. Obviously, I don't have US M&A experience in itself, but I did work on cross-border transactions. And then they don't know what to do with you when they hear that. I just went all in. I joined the affinity bar associations. I would join in whatever CLEs I could, whatever webinars I could. I would try to speak with as many people as possible and try to give them a synopsis of what I had been dealing with. And there was one hiring partner that I spoke to. Again, it was another big firm. And she gave me very contradictory advice because she basically said, oh, you have all this experience, you have this, you have that. So make sure you market yourself as a fifth-year M&A associate. And in my head, I'm like, well, I'm kind of already doing that. But I'm having trouble to even go in as a first year or a second year, The thing is, she is actually the hiring partner for her firm. And that is her area of practice as well. And then she says, if you came to be sitting in front of me, I wouldn't know what to do with you. She actually said that. We were in this window of maybe 7-8 people, right, in a breakout room. And she actually said, I wouldn't know what to do with you. I started having conversations with whoever I could find that was related to the profession or in the profession. And one of my husband's friends, she's counsel at another big firm. And she basically told me two things. Number one, very nicely, that I'm not in a position to vouch for anyone to bring them into the firm because she's not an associate, she's pro bono counsel. So she said, they're not going to listen to my recommendation. Number two, she said, I understand that thinking. They're like, if you didn't come out from a university that they can recognize, that you just came out of Columbia, or you just came out of Fordham, they just don't really know what you can do. And I said, but I'm sitting in front of you. You are talking to me. You're hearing me explain what I've done. So what is the disconnect? You just need to see an American law school that's associated with my name on my profile. What exactly do you need? It's just that conversation that I had to keep having over and over again. I did M&A. I was trained at M&A. That was the bulk of my substantive experience. I want to go back here. And I need to know with certainty that I can't do that. And then I can assess what's going to be next. But what I couldn't understand was why I was not being initially considered in the first place. And I was just trying to break down that door. And it came to a point where I had to pivot. The longer I waited to get that so-called perfect position, then I would have had something else that would have been used against me negatively, which is, oh, why do you have a gap? You were admitted 6 months ago. And if I say, oh, well, I'm looking for something, then it would be, oh, you could just work somewhere else while you're trying to get this. And then now when you get that pivot job, that's not what you wanted. And if you find something else that's better and you leave, say in a year or so, now that's going to be used against you because you left too soon. But should I continue to stay in a practice area or in a position that I'm either overqualified for or don't see myself in long term? when I get a better opportunity, just so it doesn't look like it's a short stint on my resume, and then have to deal with that feedback again from upcoming recruiters and potential employers. So it was just all of that at the same time. And what made it more difficult for me, Tanya, was that I got admitted 10 weeks before COVID hit New York City, right? So it's like everything that you can possibly imagine in terms of like how things could go wrong, that was basically what happened to me.
I'm laughing, but not because it's haha funny. I'm laughing because I'm like, of course it did. Of course this happened during COVID. I will say again, I know I've already said this once, you are so generous with the way you are so forgiving of so many of these folks. Because I, on the other hand, think that if you are a recruiter, a managing partner, if you are responsible for hiring in any respect, you'd better believe it's your job to understand different trajectories. And the willful ignorance, you think you're the first time they met an international lawyer, these people? No, they meet them all the time. This is a conscious choice at this point. If you are not taking the time to figure out how to include immigrant lawyers into your workforce, that is purposeful. You are purposely excluding people. And that is not a surprise to me because we exclude our own people. We exclude Americans, born and raised Americans. If you are not from a T14 school, you barely get a chance to even be looked at, right? Even those lucky few LLMs who make it into these spots, because I've known quite a few of them, I have seen some horrific behaviors from these firms 3-4 years in when the first visa is up. That really shows you who's down to think about recruitment diversity when it comes to immigrant lawyers and who doesn't. I know so many people who 3 years into their gig are like, oh, I'm going to have to lateral to another firm because this firm is not going to keep me here. This firm is not going to make sure that my immigration status and all the things I need to do are in line with my ability to work here. And I had a good friend who literally had to go to a different firm just a year before her visa would have been up because she got the message real quick. They were like, oh, we don't do this. We'll have you, we'll play this little game for a few years with you. We're not here for the long haul. I do think that we need a come to truth moment. Like, how can we sit here and talk about all the lack of diversity in our industry when we have, you want to talk about diversity? The world knocking at our door saying, hey, we want to practice here. And it's not only the legal industry. I think we're pretty bad about it and the stories are horrific. But I mean, it happens to doctors, it happens to nurses. How many doctors do you hear about who were amazing doctors in their countries and are driving cabs here, right? Like we have a serious systemic problem when it comes to incorporating the immigrant workforce. Nothing about it surprises me. This is what America is. This is what it is. All right. We love to talk about the melting pot and how everyone works together. That's not quite right. There's definitely a hierarchy and we try to relegate the lowest possible positions to not us. Right? Anyone else but us. And so this is what that looks like. So I appreciate your candor. And I really hope that this is the start. This conversation is the start to so much more. Because at this point, it's like, if we're not dealing with it directly, we are purposefully creating inequity. Like there are no excuses at this point. Like we need to like really grab this thing by the horns and figure this out, I think. My personal opinion.
I agree. And actually, I just wanted to add a couple of things, Tanya, to what you said. This doesn't directly concern me, but I know a lot of people who are in this position as well. When I mentioned earlier that immigration is not an issue for me, I still intimately understand it because it's something that my brother is dealing with. So because he is dealing with that, as a family, we deal with that too. In fact, he's currently going through visa renewal. And it's so stressful to think like, will I get it in time? Will it get approved? Do I still get to stay in this country? And then the amount of money that goes into paying the immigration lawyer and all the fees, it's insane. Then when you come from a country where the US dollar is anything from 4 times more to how many times more, you kind of have to beg, borrow, and steal just to be in the country, to study and to try and create a life. You're already going through all of those stresses, right? And then you're left at the mercy of the USCIS and how long they take to review and approve your visa. And I think not enough consideration is given to the foreign lawyers who actually have to go through those immigration hurdles as well. And when you talked about play the game for 4 years and, whatever, I actually just recently spoke to another friend of a friend who is a foreign trained attorney from Thailand. And she managed to, I guess, beat the system. And she got into big law. But she went in as a first year, and I think she was a third or fourth year back in Thailand. But she's happy. She's happy to go in as a first year. And when I told her my experience, and I said, I've come to the point and the age where I can't go in as the first year, right? Maybe when I first got admitted 5 years ago, yes, but not now. And then she told me, she said, I have a friend. She's a second year. She's a foreign trained attorney from India. She was in her 8th year, going to her 9th year. And they only gave her a 1 year credit. So she's here as a second year. And I was like, yeah, maybe this was a blessing in disguise for me because I don't think I can do that. And I'm not saying this from a place of arrogance. I'm just saying it from a place of where will that put me in terms of eventually where I want to go? Because I don't want to play that game. I understand if you have to pay your dues, but not in a way that just doesn't even make sense. And the stories of how they got in, which, by the way, at this point, I've spoken to almost 10 people who've managed foreign lawyers, who've gotten into big law. And you know what the secret was? And I felt kind of a bit stupid when I heard it. They said, we have a spreadsheet and we literally just do research and we look for partners in big law firms who are in our area of practice from our country. We try to find out what we can about them, like find their Facebook page, find whatever information, and try to connect with them at a personal level. And we just send emails. So they keep a spreadsheet of who they wrote to, information about that person, trying to connect on a personal level, like what day they wrote, do they send a follow-up? So they're like, yeah, I was sending 300 emails a week. And I said, seriously? I believe in cold calling, cold emailing, but I kind of felt like that was a bit intense. Like I would have done it if I had known that was a thing, but I wasn't in an LLM program. So apparently among LLM students, like foreign lawyers, a lot of them, they share this tactic that they've been doing, and it actually has worked for some of them, right? So I'm thinking, on top of studying for your master's, being a foreigner, being an immigrant in a country by yourself, worrying about your immigration schedule and whatever that comes with that, you have to maintain your spreadsheet of like emailing the partners and hoping that someone's going to answer you. I was dumbfounded, and a part of me kicked myself a bit. I said, maybe I should have done that from the beginning, right? Maybe I would be somewhere. I would have gone into one of those bigger firms. And I was like, yeah, maybe no. Maybe I didn't want that. Who knows?
Tell me again how we have a meritocracy. It has nothing to do with how skilled you are. My husband, it was so many different situations, right? Yes, it was the LLM. How many people would reach out to him and be like, oh, if you had a JD, it'd be a different story. Meanwhile, my husband worked for an American big law firm in a foreign country.
Yeah.
Right, for 2 years. And every time they would just say, well, that's not in America, so that doesn't count. Meanwhile, my husband, while all of this is happening, he couldn't work while he was in the US for a while because we got married and the visa situation's different. And then when you're waiting for your green card, there's certain rules, right? Mm-hmm. So then not working is a gap that you then have to explain. Yeah. It's just, it's nonstop. The obstacles are nonstop. Yeah. And it's exactly what we're seeing for students who are not in T14, right? Like there is systemic exclusion. So when I hear about the diversity issues and what all these folks are doing, I want them to have to show us, what is your plan for integrating immigrant lawyers? What is your plan for integrating students who didn't go to T14? Why isn't everyone holding each other accountable? And the answer is simple. This is a very well-oiled machine.
Right.
You don't really have to do anything. It's going to work just as it was meant to.
Yes. Because
OCI is getting earlier and earlier. Every year it's a little bit earlier so that firms can compete amongst themselves among this many students, like a handful of students. And so there's always going to be demand. Change won't come voluntarily. I think we need to, as an industry, we're a self-regulating industry, we need to lobby and put pressure on the folks who write our rules and write what it is our expectations are. And so that's some of the work we're hoping to do, right? Trying to like think about how we can spearhead this and maybe move the needle in a way that it hasn't been moved before? Because if not us, then who? If it's not the very lawyers who are practicing right now, who will do that? So thank you for sharing all that.
Christina, you've touched on this a bit. To what extent is your experience typical among foreign attorneys? And have you found that sharing your story has positively impacted other legal professionals?
So this is great. Actually, I was going to say something about this in relation to what Tanya just mentioned about her husband. And earlier, actually, just to piggyback a little bit on what I said about the meaning of DEI, diversity also means diversity of thought. And when you have practiced law in a country other than America, you could be from Asia, Southeast Asia, Russia, any part of Europe, any part of Africa, South America, right? That cultural diversity of the way people live and think and behave, right? And those nuances, we collect, the collective we, of foreign trained lawyers, we bring a breadth of experience, like non-legal experience, but just this cultural legal diversity that shows in the way we interact with clients, with other lawyers. And I think we come from a place of more humility, because anyone that is willing to give up what they have in their country after everything that they've worked to establish, to come and start again, not knowing what is waiting for you, you have to respect that. It's like, would you do it? If you spoke to an American lawyer who's sitting in a very cushy position, would you do it? And the answer would probably be no, because you're going towards something that you just don't understand. So to answer your current question, Angie, my opinion is that I was scared. If I'm being honest, I was scared. And my husband is from Chicago. He's Irish American, but he completely understands this, and he's an advocate as well for this whole issue, because he's been going through it with me for the past few years. And I am scared. When he speaks up on something, I always think, you know what? I wouldn't say that because I'm scared. There's always this fear of repercussion. And it's, oh my God, like, would I lose what I currently have if I speak out about something? But then I realized I'm not lying, right? I'm actually talking about my own experience, which is factual. It's not fabricated. It's literally what I have experienced. So where is this fear coming from? And again, growing up in my part of the world, you're not encouraged to speak up. You're not encouraged to speak your mind. Sometimes you're gaslit as well. There's always a reason as to why that injustice is there or why that inequality is there. So to be honest with you, I was scared to speak out about whatever that I had been dealing with for my first few years of dealing with. And I think at sometime last year, it came to a point where I was like, you know what, at this point, I have nothing to lose. I am going to be a bit more vocal about this and see what happens. And funnily enough, the very first time I spoke about this was in May of last year. It was at an affinity bar event where they were talking about immigrant lawyers, foreign trained attorneys. And I had actually volunteered myself before to be a panelist on something like that, so that I could share resources for the bar and things like that for people who didn't study here. You wouldn't know things that you could do. I use, for example, like AdaptiBar for studying for the bar, which I didn't know that existed, and it actually helped me out a lot. And the funny thing is, I think it was said to me in an indirect way that I've not established myself enough in the legal profession here to actually be a panelist for that discussion, which was really like, you have 4 people on the panel. 2 of them are American trained lawyers. They literally are not immigrant lawyers. So what are they doing on the panel? How can they even remotely identify with the issues that foreign trained lawyers actually deal with? So what I did was I waited for the whole thing to be done, and there was a Q&A session, and then there were 2 questions that were asked by other foreign trained lawyers. And I said, hi, I have more of a comment. It's not a question. And I basically explained myself, and I said, look, they always look at 2 things. There's 2 categories, right? You're either a JD or you're an LLM. And when I tell people that I'm neither, people are confused. And they say, why? I said, why? I was exempted from having to do an LLM. So I come under like this third unseen category that doesn't really exist. But I'm a barred attorney, right? I'm barred. So I just basically called out, I said, DEI directors, if there is a position that is created in a firm where the person is a DEI director, you should know that this is not just a JD or an LLM. There's another way that a foreign attorney can get admitted, and you should understand that. There's a whole section on foreign legal education. Go and find out how there are lawyers who can get admitted and sit for the bar without having to do an LLM. And then don't question them on the adequacy of their previous legal education when the Board of Law Examiners, which is the qualifying body, has already determined that they were eligible to sit for the bar, which they then sat for and passed. Funnily enough, the DEI director of that particular firm didn't even understand it and didn't even know it. I called out DI directors and hiring partners. I said, it should be your job. It is your job, and it should be your mission to understand, as you said, Tanya, earlier, understand the trajectories of non-traditional American lawyers and what their path to admission is. If you don't even understand how lawyers become lawyers in the first place, what diversity are you creating? What inclusionary methods are you adopting when you don't even know where it comes from? How can you solve a problem when you don't know what causes the problem? And it's just that such a simple concept that no one really understands. So when I mentioned this at the end of that panel session, when the talk was over, I had about close to 10 of the attendees come and surround me and talk to me instead of talking to the panelists for that event. And, one of the girls said something that really hit home for me. And she said, we want to bring this up, but we are so scared because we don't have a job yet. And we don't want to burn any bridges. I got a bit scared too, how I was for the first few years. Okay, this is going to mess me up too. And that's there. And then I talked to my husband and he said, no, you should actually be brave. You should actually just talk about it. Anyone who's going to hold it against you like this, actually, it's on them. It's not on you, because this is literally what you've been experiencing. You're not lying. You've done whatever that you can to be seen and heard. You could probably become some sort of an advocate for this group of attorneys that are usually just overlooked. And another affinity bars, when I proposed it to them, they immediately put together a panel and they called me as a speaker, and we had a talk in December, how to thrive as an immigrant attorney, and it actually turned out pretty well. So again, I feel like sometimes, as you mentioned, Tanya, you said I'm being generous, right? So maybe I'll try to not be so generous with what I'm about to say. And I honestly think sometimes we have blockers within the profession. And again, I don't want to claim to understand what the motivation is for doing that. Because in New York, compared to what I've been used to or other smaller countries, maybe there's not a seat at the table for everyone, so you have to just keep it to yourself. But that's not the case here. There is a seat at the table for everyone, and as they say, the higher up you go, send the ladder down, right? So when the people that are already there, when you send the ladder down, it's not going to take you away from where you're at and what you've done and how much money you earn and what you're doing. It doesn't at all. So why would you want to be involved in bar associations? Are you just coming to hang out with your friends? You're actually in a position that your opinion would actually carry a lot of weight. So what are you doing about that? I know we're a roundabout way of answering your question, Angie, but my answer is yes. It is very common. It's more common than you think. But because foreign trained attorneys are such a small segment of the legal profession population, that we are usually passed over and we are actually an afterthought, not even an afterthought, I think sometimes, because the systems that are in place do not consider us at all, which is why I feel that foreign trained attorneys should be considered and included as a category of DEI under the legal profession. That is basically my takeaway. We should be a category of DEI.
I mean, that's what's crazy, Christina. You are. If you're a DI practitioner and you're not considering immigrants, or a hiring manager and you're not considering immigrants, what are you doing?
What is your job?
What is your job? I just don't understand it. Yeah. No, I think I'm so glad that you're getting the platforms that you're getting. And I feel like
Thank you.
From here on out, your husband's not wrong, right? Maybe this is where you're going to really find your footing and make your mark in some way, shape, or form, because this issue is ripe. It's been ripe.
Mm-hmm.
We're losing so much talent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're losing so much talent. Right now, we were just talking about this. You turn on the news and DI is under attack everywhere. And I think the only way that we deal with that is by being the people in the room who raise their hands and say, actually, this is what I want my profession to look like. These are the people I think we need to recruit. Mm-hmm. Let's make sure we get this right. Mm-hmm. And not just waving your hands in the air and be like, oh, I don't know. I don't know where you come from. I don't know how this works. So good luck with your life, right? And keep moving. It's understanding the collateral consequences of your actions, especially if you have a platform and affects the lives of so many people.
Yes.
Take your power seriously. Like, if you have power over them, respect the fact that your decisions are going to affect their lives. Earlier, you were like, I don't think anyone does that on purpose. But there are actually, like, historically, people on purpose were trying to exclude us. It's not a coincidence. This isn't just a happy accident or an unhappy accident. People in power made very important decisions to exclude those who didn't have families that had lawyers, those who were foreign born or from families of foreign born people, to purposely exclude people who are poor or from lower socioeconomic status, because being in this profession for so long in this country was something of the bourgeoisie, right? Like the higher elite people in this country. We're still seeing that. And it still curses us in many ways. It's continuing to exclude people way beyond any of us even realize. And so I think now is the time. If not now, when? Let's stop pushing this forward.
Christina, in your experience, how do you mitigate all of these issues that we discussed today? And how could we as a system better handle these things moving forward?
First of all, the key word here is awareness. So again, recognize, Tanya put it so well, the collateral consequence of your actions and also the power that you yield to make a difference. Because what I see is very established systems. And this doesn't just go through for hiring and recruiting. I think just the nature of especially bigger American law firms. There's not much flexibility in amending systems, things that are how things operate and how things always have been. Just having awareness. Okay, first things is like, I didn't know what an OCI was because I didn't have an OCI because I didn't go to law school here. So if you are having OCIs and that's how you recruit your associates, what about someone who did an LLM who does not have access to an OCI? Or what about someone like me who comes again, third unseen category of being exempted from an LLM and is not plugged into a university? What resources do we have? And then maybe having some sort of a bridge between the Board of Law Examiners together with the Bar Associations to say, we do exemptions for people who can bypass Rule 520.6, but this shouldn't be a reason that they are then not given access to resources that other foreign lawyers who have done an LLM that have it through the alumni office when they graduate with an LLM. And I think the same resources for looking for jobs and being considered for jobs should be housed somewhere that everyone can access it, not just American trained lawyers, but also foreign trained lawyers, right? If you look on most of the Bar Association's websites, there's nothing, there's no section for foreign trained lawyers. Recently, I think about 2 months ago, I have to acknowledge this because it's the first time I'm seeing it. The HNBA, the Hispanic National Bar Association, actually started a section for foreign trained attorneys. And I was so happy to see that because I feel like finally there's some bar association that's acknowledging the need to have a committee or a section or something on the website that has resources because it helps so much. So I think just having resources, because there could be people in my position relying on Google and Reddit forums to know how to study for the bar, what bar course to take, how long do I have to wait to get admitted, because I didn't know anyone. And you have to assume, as you say, the world is knocking on our door. Tanya, as you said, not everyone is coming here with a ready-made family. Not everyone is coming here with a ready-made network. In fact, the majority of people who come here are not. And they need to have availability of these resources so that they can know what steps to take. You have the ones who are slightly more privileged where they are being funded by their families. As they come here, they have their whole plan. I'm doing my LLM and doing things. But not everyone is going to come in that category, right? So we need to have resources and we cannot say, oh, I don't know, it's not my problem. Good luck, turn them away. And I kind of chuckled to myself, Tanya, when you said good luck earlier, because that is literally something that happened to me. Also, again, at another bar, Affinity Bar event, where we were in this sharing circle and these two partners from big law firms were giving a powwow about how they got to where they are. And they were saying, you need to have a mentor and you need to have a sponsor. And in my naive Southeast Asian experience head, I was like, okay, I understand mentorship. But what on earth is a sponsor? Like, I know the meaning of the word sponsor, but what does that mean? Because I felt stupid, right? I felt like, how can I not know this? And basically someone else asked, what is a sponsor? And She answered saying, you have a mentor and then you also need to have a sponsor, someone who's very high up, like a senior partner in the firm, that can basically move you around like pieces on a chessboard, and they can move you around. And I was like, no, I'm not on any chessboard. I need to get on a chessboard in the first place. And with all the advice they were giving, I felt very intimidated, but I was like, okay, you know what? It's fine. There's hope. And after hearing my background, and I didn't ask anyone for anything, mind you, but at the end of that, instead of saying, why don't you send me a resume, or why don't set up a call with me? Let me see if I can introduce you to someone. Instead of doing any of that, it was just good luck. It was just, oh, good luck with everything. And I was like, seriously? I don't expect anything. But the fact that you did that, and it's supposed to be, it was a women's committee affinity bar on top of that. If you're not even helping your own kind, what are you there for? When I came out of there, I thought I had it together, but then I called my husband on the phone. I'm standing in the middle of Midtown, and I actually burst into tears. That was my first realization of what this was and what I was dealing with. And I actually was like, did I make a mistake moving to New York? Because I was doing so well in Malaysia, and I was a couple of years away from being considered for partnership. And what am I doing? Did I just give all this up and go through all this for nothing? And then you try to walk back your steps and trace back. And when you come too far to do that as well. And also another thing I would like to actually point this out, what people here don't realize when they're dismissing you is that for all these things that you had to do and the time that you had to wait to do it, you are also missing out on those years that you could have been in your country and continued to climb up the ladder to get to a higher position. And then when you're here, you're looking at your peers who have already done that. And then you're thinking, that's it. Either way, I'm jacked, because what am I going to do now, right? And for me right now, all of my peers are either partners in big firms, started their own firms, general counsels. And it's difficult for me to think that how can I be in that position when I graduated number 2 in my class? And how can people who I did better at law school, why am I in this position? Because I wanted to have the dream of living in New York. Was that worth it? You beat yourself up. So having these conversations is the first step to awareness. And there shouldn't be repercussions for people who voice out what they're dealing with. I think Bar Association should really take a step in being active about this, talking about this, creating a section, taking a page out of the HNBA, starting a section, being active about it, calling other foreign trained lawyers who have managed to beat the system and make it, getting them to help. And what I usually realize is that someone who is not usually an American trained lawyer is going to be more inclined to help you, right? Come, let me introduce you to someone. Let me pass your resume to someone. And that's I don't know about other parts of the world, but that's a very common thing in Malaysia, in Asia. Like, it's all just, let me send your resume. But here, even when you sign up for, I won't mention which bar, but even when you sign up for a mentorship program, and they send you a list of what you can do and what you can't do, don't ask your mentor for a job. Don't ask it. And people usually have enough maturity to know that you're not going to do that, right? But when they hear your story, shouldn't they be able to just give you resources or say, oh, so-and-so should be able to help? You should be at a point like where you can just take your contact list and you just know who's going to be in a position to help this person. Because otherwise that person is left like doing research and finding partners and having a spreadsheet and sending 300 emails a week. And that shouldn't be the case. There should be a way in which we can get access to apply for these jobs and be considered for these jobs. So that would be the first thing. The second thing would be the bar associations actually setting up sections or a section on the website or a committee for foreign trained lawyers. And I think also in terms of the next thing would be like technology. So when you have all those automated job applications, you should take into account that some lawyers may not have a college degree. Someone who came like from my background, for example, because we went straight to law school after doing tertiary qualification. So it's things like that so that the ATS doesn't kick you out of the consideration process. And training your HR people, training your recruitment people, training your DI director, the DI team themselves needs to be trained to understand the different types of trajectories. So this is what I can think of at the top of my head. And then I think other than that, the only other thing would be continuing to have the conversations and be willing to understand that what you think you know about the extent of DEI within the legal profession is an ever-evolving topic, and that you should be open to considering how, like, there's so many other types of inequalities and injustices that present itself, and you need to work together as a profession to find solutions to that, one step at a time.
I love it. And I feel like you're going to lead the charge on this in so many ways. But we're going to talk about this offline. Thank you so much for being here with us, for sharing this knowledge. And I hope that this is an invitation for our listeners to look into more ways they can be supportive of all this talent. Whether you are in a corporate space, a big law firm, a small law firm, wherever you are, go to HR, find out what's up, find out what you can do to make this better. Everyone can be helping. Do you have any closing words, Christina?
The takeaway that I wanted to have from this whole conversation is that we think that we don't have the ability to effect change. And I would actually look myself in that category as well, because it took me so long to start vocalizing even my own feelings about this. But I've seen a lot of positive things come out of it. It wasn't just that event where people came around me and started talking to me. I've been getting so many messages from people I don't know, from other countries, asking me, how did you get eligible? How did you get admitted? Like, you're living the dream. And I'd be like, you don't know, like all the hurdles I've had to deal with. But to a lot of people, like even just being here and being admitted is already a dream. And then it gives me that perspective of how I've already dealt with all these things and I'm on my way. I always like to think of things happening for a reason, and maybe this was the reason. So I can actually be a voice and contribute, not like effecting great change, but at least small change for this group of lawyers that are just not considered. I just think people, especially lawyers, you have more influence than you think you have, even just putting something on your LinkedIn page, even just creating awareness, because be surprised the number of people you talk to who just don't even understand.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We're so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks again for all that you guys do.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Building Belonging. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe wherever you listen. Find more City Bar podcasts on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, iHeart, or at our website at www.nycbar.org/podcasts. Be sure to check out This Lawyer's Life, a professional development podcast where we talk with lawyers about seizing opportunities, learning lessons the hard way, and about what makes them tick. This podcast was produced by Mary Ellen LaRosa and edited by Chris Murphy.